First of all, can I just thank the college for the invitation. I love this industry, and I have for more than 4 decades. I'm very passionate, that's why I do a lot of stuff with Marcus Oldham with the students, because I really do love seeing the younger generation coming through and have the passion, the enthusiasm in agriculture. I think it's fantastic. So to be able to speak to a group like this I'm chuffed. So thank you very much, first of all, from that point of view. As Sean mentioned, my wife and I farm on the Bellarine Peninsula. My wife Fiona does the day-to-day farming. We turn off steers for the long-fed Japanese market. We're part of a progeny test herd for a group called Tamania Angus. And we've also got fine wool sheep as well. And so, as well as doing the advisory stuff, I'm trying to put it into practice. So, as Sean said, the link between those two really does keep us pretty well grounded, because you know the pain when everybody's going through pain. What I'd like to do though is, I suppose if I project forward 30 or 40 years, where do I think this is all going? And I can tell you, if I had my choice again and I was a student sitting with my blazer on, I would pick this in a flash. I think this is the most exciting area that you can get into for a whole host of reasons. And hopefully I'll touch on a few of those as I quickly whip through this. But first of all, I'd just like to give a little bit of context. As we all know, Australia's got a very vast country, and there's a lot of areas, mainly in the green, that are more intensively managed. But there are also very large swathes of this country that are more extensively managed, if you like, where the inputs aren't as great, but there is still an enormous amount of management that goes on around that. And what we produce from that is about $85 to $100 billion worth of value a year. We ticked over the $100 billion a couple of years ago. We're likely to do it again this year if the season in some areas pans out pretty well. So it's a substantial part of the Australian economy and what we do. And in particular, we grow a lot more than we ever eat. So we are a very important exporter to other countries around the world. And that becomes very important when we start to look at population growth and exactly what people are aspiring to eat. And this is one I got from Rabobank only a month ago, but I think this is really important when we start to think about Australian farmers compared to the rest of the world. And so Australian commercial farms, so not the small hobby farms, but anything that's in a commercial farming sort of sense, every Australian farm that is a commercial farm sits in the top 1% of all farms in the world. So we are big farmers, and we are very unique because our whole industry is that size. Okay? It just stunned me when I thought that. We're in that top 1% for big, large-scale farming operations. It's about 300,000 people employed, but if you look at that as the national employment, it's about 2%. And I'm going to come back to this point because I think in the future this is one of the challenges that we've got as far as how many of us are actually employed and how we influence that other 98% to actually know what we do. But the last point I want to put down is that the global population is still growing. And there's two things to this. There'll be another 2 billion people in the next 40 or 50 years that need to be fed and clothed. And there's the billions of people that are on the planet at the moment that are aspiring to be better fed, to be able to choose better quality food, okay, and to be clothed better. So what I think Australia can provide in the positioning of our agricultural sector fits incredibly well with where I see the future going, this sort of stuff. So, exciting future. What are some of those things that are going to drive it? This one I just can't get away from because there's too many of these things popping up at the moment around technology that I think are going to give us an enormous lift in where agriculture sits and where it's viewed. We've got things like variable rate that people will be aware of, where you can map paddocks, work out topographies, soil type, nutrients and things like that, and we can vary what we put into them, those nutrients that go into it. We've got precision application now. The idea of drones going around and spot spraying things in paddocks is real. It's happening now. Okay. We've got things like moisture probes where we know how much water's actually sitting in the ground and we know what the temperature fluctuation is. Why is this important? Because for the first time, the thing that drives plant growth is water and temperature. And as soon as you've got a real-time understanding of those two, you actually know how much you're going to grow. That is a huge change from when we were guessing at what we think we might grow. We actually know what we can do now, as far as that goes. Satellite monitoring, we're now down to 6-8 metre pixel size. Satellite flying 100 kilometres overhead can make a square half the size of this I'm standing on now, and actually predict what that quantity of pasture is that's growing there. We've got these apps simply on your phone that can tell you where are the animals, how many animals have been there. This is mobile, this is the one we use at home. I can now tell which of my paddocks are more productive than others. Where before you think they were going all right and you had some idea of it, now I've got a very precise understanding of what's performing and where it's performing. These sort of things, anybody heard of a thing called OptiWay before? Tell you what, if you want to get your kids off social media, buy them an OptiWay. They are the most addictive things that you get on your phone. What they are is that the animals walk on them, put their front feet on it, and they get an instant weight of what that animal has done for the day. So you can see how fast they're growing. And if we put animals in different paddocks, we can see the different growth rates on those different types of pastures. In fact, we pay for that OptiWay, it's about 20 grand. We pay for that OptiWay just in one lot of movement with a group of steers. When we were following them, my wife is following them every day. That's what she gets up every morning now. First bit of social stuff she does is check the OptiWay, see what the animals have done. They would gain 1.5 kilos a day for the first 6 or 7 days. Day 8 in the paddock, they'd drop down to 1 kilo. Day 9 would be half a kilo. Day 10, they wouldn't be gaining any weight. And day 10 was historically when we would have moved those animals. We now started moving them on day 7, when they were gaining all the time, and ended up running a mob of wethers, which I never thought I would have done, behind them to clean up the paddock the way I wanted it, so it would regrow the way I wanted. We turned those steers off 5 weeks earlier, got another 50 cents a kilo for them because we turned them off earlier and met weight. That sort of stuff that's coming out now because of this technology is just taking us to the next level that we didn't have before. EIDs, people have been familiar with this now. We've been using them in cattle for about 30 years with our progeny test work with our cattle, but with sheep, relatively new. But we can now treat individual animals rather than mobs or herds. And that is making an enormous difference because the selection pressure you can put on them and the choices you can make to produce the animal that you want, and very productive animals, has now evolved. And when you combine that with genomics, Jason spoke about the ASBVs of sheep, this next level now, and we're starting to move in things like genomics, where you can take a blood sample and you can get that sent off and you know the characteristics of those animals. It is just going to take us to another level. It's incredibly exciting.
Yeah. Do we have the right to ask a question now? Do we have the right to ask something?
Yeah.
In the first slide, you have shown the value 80 to 100 billion.
Yes.
Is it just for the green part of the map or throughout the
No, that's for the whole of Australia. So a fair bit of that actually comes out of Northern Australia, which is that extensive grazing areas. Yeah. Okay. So these are some of the technologies that I think are just evolving. And, sorry, if I go back one, the stock handling stuff we've got now. I mean, we introduced this because we're both getting old, but Fiona can drench 600 wethers in an hour and a half, one person, and walk away as fresh as a daisy. Before, 2 of us would struggle for half a day and we'd be buggered. Okay? So this technology, auto-drafting, auto-weighing, all of this sort of stuff, the new technology that's coming in is changing the way we think about the agricultural systems and the way we operate them. And then if we go to the next level, things like virtual fencing, which has had some hurdles as far as regulatory stuff goes, but this idea of being able to draw on a tablet where you want the animals to graze and where you don't want them to graze, and based on satellite and these sort of things here, the animals get alerts when they're moving in and out of the right zones or not, is an absolute game changer. I'm not talking about fencing paddocks anymore, I'm talking about drawing things on a tablet at home, and the animals move where they're going to move. This stuff, now this is really simple, bread and butter stuff. That's a pasture, what's growing in it, how much is growing in it. I'm working with a fella at the moment who's mad on this machine learning and AI. And he's saying, just help me train, take a photo with your phone and I will tell you everything about that. Composition of it, the growth of it, the quality of it, the different species of it and so on. And we'll be able to do that, and you'll just be able to point your phone at it, and we'll be able to get that to happen. And one that I was really chuffed about is facial recognition. Now, I thought they all looked the same. We've had all this fuss about going into Bunnings and having your face recognised because of the cameras that they've got up there. The stuff you mentioned, Sean, the podcast I did with Ferg. Ferg's over in New Zealand now. They're setting cameras up in paddocks. They can recognise the face of the ewe, and they can recognise in their twin and triplets how many of them are raising 2 and 3 lambs and which lambs they are. So when they come back through the yards, they're actually able to pick up those individuals. Now, I thought that looked like a sheep. It's not. Everyone is individual. And parking those in the paddock and not disturbing them, but then collecting all that data about which mums are doing what and which lambs are associated with what, and then the ability to select from that is just going to take us just quantum leaps of where I think we've been in the 20 or 30 years that I've been playing in the ag space. But we need to keep adopting this stuff. And so the message is that what we've done in the last 20 odd years, our rate of productivity improvement, when you look at it in agriculture, is less than 1% a year. It's actually 0.72% a year. So our gains, if you like, in the productivity of our systems have been pretty poor. Much lower than what they were 20 years before that. So from the 1980s to 2000s, about 2.5%. So we've slowed down, similar to what a lot of challenges we've got in the rest of the country. Okay. But some of those technologies I'm talking about, they're 5-10% a year gains. It's going to take agriculture out of something that you struggle to make a living from to something that can be highly, highly profitable. Okay. And we really need to get that higher productivity because our costs are rising. And with the 1% that we've been doing at the moment, that's why the industry feels so squeezed all the time, is that we're not gaining fast enough for the costs that have gone up commensurate to that. And so we tend to be spending more, but we're not making much more in the margin. I think some of those technologies I showed you before is where that margin will start to widen again. And agriculture will become a very attractive sector to get a return on money because we'll go really well in it. But my observations of the 40 years that I've worked with individual clients is you can make money out of any enterprise if you want to do it well. You know, people say to me, oh, should I be in sheep or should I be in cattle or should I be in cropping? I say you make money out of any of these as long as you do them well. So as long as you know the fundamentals, you'll be able to do that. And secondly, that the technology that we're now being exposed to, we've got to make sure that it helps our decision making and helps what we're doing for the money we're investing and doesn't distract from it. And I've seen a few cases where I've had to help people sort of work their way through saying, yeah, we've got all this tech, we've got all this information, but how's it actually helping us make better decisions and farm better? And so we've got to be able to sift that out as part of it. So we need to keep adapting, but I think there are some really good, exciting things from a technological front. But there are a few emerging challenges, I reckon, which I think we can overcome if we've got the mindset right. The first one is around climate change. Now, I don't want to go into sort of a debate about is climate change real, is it happening, all that sort of stuff. But what I can say from the information and the analysis that I've certainly done, and I'm only going to put one graph up at the moment, is this one here. Now, just to explain, along the bottom is from 1970 to 2023. This is a Phalaris subclover pasture at Ararat. Up on the x-axis, the y-axis, sorry, this one up here is the kilograms of dry matter that you've grown for the year, and the 4 bars just represent the 4 seasons. I've mucked around a bit and I've said spring's got 4 months in it, summer's got 2, but you probably get the gist. The takeaway from that, first of all, we're farming something that's very volatile from year to year. So when we talk about risk and risk in agriculture, it is real and this is one of them. And we have to adapt and we have to be clever enough to be able to adapt to a season that looks like that and then the next year a season that looks like that. It takes an enormous amount of skill to be able to bounce from one of those to the next. To capitalise on these couple of good years like that and then have a year after it like that. And how do you respond and the decisions you make to respond to ride that roller coaster. But when I mentioned the climate change one, what we've found on the analysis over time is that what we used to be able to grow in the 1970s, the environment we've got now, you grow about 15% less. Now, we've made up for some of that because we've got better varieties and better species that we've sown. And they've made up that gap, so we haven't felt the pinch as much. But the seasons are changing. Our autumns and the predictions from this going down, but also in the future, is that our autumns and our autumn breaks are going to be different. Okay? In fact, more of them are going to be later. Our winters are actually going to grow more because it's going to be warmer. But our springs, the good springs that we have, which quite often we rely on, more of those are going to decrease. We're going to get less good springs that run into Christmas time. This data is showing it, and so one of the challenges going forward is how do we adapt our systems as this starts happening. Okay? It is happening now. I reckon we've just been masked from it because we've put better varieties in that grow better, and therefore that lack of, if you like, seasonal conditions to grow stuff has disappeared because of the better varieties we've got. But it'll eventually catch up with us. And so we need to think about how we adapt our systems accordingly. So that's one. The second one, and I'm only going to put one slide up here, is around consumer and market demands. I've seen 30 years ago, there was hardly a mention of any of that. You farmed, you produced stuff, you put it on the market, someone bought it. That expectation has changed dramatically, and I think to get a full picture around this is a bit of work that was produced by the National Farmers Federation, so it's from the farm up, and it's called the Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework. But they have actually 17 different areas of, if you like, where we think consumers and the market are going to want information about how we farm and how we do it. Okay? Now, one that Sean said I've been doing a fair bit of work in is around the emissions reduction. But if you just scan your eyes around that, we've got things around how good our soils are. We've got things around how we protect biodiversity around the farms. We've got things like animal well-being, which picks up things like using pain relief. They're all going to be part of it. And we've got things like risk mitigation, biosecurity management. As we go forward, and in the carbon space that I've been doing quite a bit with overseas buyers of grain, and their expectation now around how we need to report this as part of our production system is just going to keep growing. Now, you can look at that and go, gee, that's a concern. You know, here's all these extra demands I've got on doing my business. But what I've found, particularly working in this space, is we do it really well. And instead of promoting that we do this really well, and in fact, when I've done emissions intensity numbers around here, we stack up as some of the best in the world as far as how efficiently we produce a product and how well we produce it. But we can react by saying, gee, I don't want to go in that space, here's more work, here's more impost on us. When I see it the opposite, I think, let's run with this because we've got a really good story to tell. And we have this, Australian agriculture has a really good story to tell. There are some things that we need to tidy up a bit, but on the whole, we're miles ahead of a lot of other countries. And go back to that thing about how much we export and what future demand is going to be like. This matches in, and this is a essential requirement for that. Okay, the last one I want to touch on before I finish, and I've called it the need to engage. And I've seen a very significant change over the last 40 years of how agriculture is perceived and understood in the wider community. What do I mean by the need to engage? Put this poster up here, you can have a bit of a study of that. Anybody like to guess what they reckon that might be? A poster of? Got some unusual dudes there. You've got a couple with the pitchforks, you've got one with a leek. You've got someone who wants to throw an orange at you. Anybody got any idea what that might be? That was an ad or a poster put up in a truck stop in Japan. We went for a study tour to Japan a few years ago. That is the Japanese Farmers Union. Now, the Japanese Farmers Union are the most influential union in Japan and have the most political influence on what happens in Japan. Contrast that in Australia, I don't think we have many Australians looking like that on a poster. So, in other words, our representative from that political point of view is very, very different. And in fact, if you go around the world, we have probably one of the lowest that I've seen, or least sort of influential farming groups in how they actually change the political or the narrative around some of the policies and things that are being made. So that's one bit. So how do you engage? This is a feature of a wife. We did one on carbon. This is with Landline. And so we're really happy to invite as many people as want to come onto our place to talk about what we do. Because the level of misunderstanding, ignorance about farming and what farmers do and how they do it is unbelievable. 40 years ago, there was always someone that either had an uncle, or a cousin, or someone else that had some connection to farming. And there was some conduit on the way through. But as we've got these big 1% of biggest farms in the world, there's Australian commercial farms, and it's 2% of the population, there's 98% of the population that don't have a lot of connection to us. So we're really keen to do this sort of stuff. So we've got a really good relationship now with Pip Courtney, and that sort of stuff. For people who remember Donald Trump's, what's it called, Liberation Day announcement in April? Okay. And one of them was they were going to put tariffs on beef, Australian beef, going into the US. And a fair bit of our beef goes into grinding beef. Because we were close to Melbourne and we're very open and inviting people onto our place, we had a whole lot of groups, Current Affair, Channel 10 News, everybody wanting to get a comment from a farmer about what was happening. And to just give you an example of the lack of understanding, it was actually a Mail reporter, not this one here, but a Mail reporter, and Fiona was feeding out some stuff because they wanted to get colour and movement shots. And she's going, I'll feed the cows here. And he just said, when do you milk them? She goes, they're beef cattle. And he went, so? Now, the interesting thing about that one, the other funny thing was they all came with their bags of McDonald's, because part of the props was they pulled the hamburger out and you'd have to pull the Big Mac apart and look at the patty inside. But the interesting thing about this is that fella, because Fiona was so engaged so well with him, that he now rings her up when he's got to do an ag story and he doesn't quite understand what he's doing. And so I ring her and say, look, can you just give us a bit of a heads up on this? I'm going to do such and such story. What are the issues around it? What should I understand and know? And if you think of where a lot of our engagement is at the moment, it's generally trying to unpick things, policies and rules and regulations that have come in, and we tend to protest. And we tend to, bang heads because we think it's a bad, some of the policies are bad. I won't go into which policies might be bad at the moment, but you can probably guess on some of them. And it's because in a lot of cases, and we're both on committees advising things in the Victorian government, they just don't know. People that are making the policies just do not understand what goes on. And so a really important part of us going forward in the future is to be able to engage with that. And we can do it in some left field sort of ways. This was the Director General of the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organisation from Rome, wanted to come out and understand something about Australian farmers. So they spent half a day with us. Okay? And at the end of it, he basically said, I did not understand this is how well Australian farmers farmed. So they have a perception of it, but until they get on the ground and people are willing to tell their stories, and in a non-political way or an apolitical way, you're not going to work it out. And there's another way, okay? So this one, backstory to this one, my son has a music festival at our place. 3-day weekend with 350 of his closest mates. And they play music and they DJ for 2.5 days. But one of the things, because it's on a working farm, one of the things when they come on, the invitation is to talk to Fiona and I about farming. Because most of them have no idea. So we put this up and we say to them, come and talk to us about farming. And they do. And it's the first time they actually understand what actually happens, what we do, why we do it. And so our engagement, when we start to think about what are we doing in the future, I just don't think we promote this side of it and, in a sense, showing off what we do well enough. So what do we need in the future? My last slide. We obviously need to know the basics. And I think that was touched on, and this idea of sheep EBVs, how pastures grow, what animals need, feed budgeting, all of those sort of things that were mentioned are essential parts of understanding and being able to run a farm business. But we're also really going to need tech-savvy people. And that's why I think it's really exciting, because this is the first generation that have basically grown up with it. And it's a different level to what Fiona and I are struggling with. Okay? But all of those new technologies that we're trying to integrate at the moment, I think will just find this second nature. The third one, and I haven't touched on, but it's a pet topic of mine, is we need good decision makers. And I've got a couple of phrases. One is, just because we make decisions all the time doesn't mean we're good at making them. And the second one, when were you taught to make a good decision the same way you were taught to read and write and do maths? Okay? Because I know when I was taught how to do maths, okay? I remember my times tables, I remember doing all the stuff, and we were taught it over and over again, wrote, and we built on it and got better and better. But when do I think about making complex decisions in the face of a whole lot of adversity, uncertainty and risk? I'm not taught any of the tools and techniques. I'm just expected to know it. And I reckon the Achilles heel in agriculture is around decision making. And so I'm doing a lot of stuff now, in fact, teaching decision making relevant to agriculture, because I think we've got a real opportunity in this space as well. And so if we can teach people on the way through in ag this idea of making good decisions and what's involved in making a good decision and the right processes to use in that, the technology will really come to the fore. And the last one, we need to engage our consumers and our policymakers, very much as, well, put their teachers, okay? Not as adversaries, not as being able to politically debate them, but as teaching them, this is what we do, because they don't have exposure to it. And why should they know if they're not going to be, if they're not exposed to it? Need to be good at public speaking. Okay? And we've got a lot of our neighbours that, I don't want to speak to anybody, I just don't like speaking to them. We really need to make sure we've got that skill in there and that advocacy part as well. And on that note, I'll leave it. So thank you very much for the opportunity.